Hey, welcome back to the Motorcyclist Podcast. This is where we talk about motorcycles and what makes them great. As always, topics on this show are constantly changing, but the one thing that remains the same is two-wheeled fun. On this episode, we're going to talk about some of our favorite motorcycle sounds and our favorite sounding motorcycles. We're going to talk about like why exhaust notes and the rattle of a dry clutch are so essential to the experience of motorcycling. And then we're going to talk about how motorcycle sounds are changing for the good and maybe the not so good. And then we're going to maybe talk about the lack of sound at the end here. So as always, we're going to start with introductions. We've got our editor, Adam Wahid. We've got in-market editor, Bradley Adams. And we got myself, executive editor, Justin Dawes. Every week, we start with what we're riding. Adam, let's start with you. What have you been riding this week?
This week I've been riding Zero Motorcycles 2024 DSRX. So this is an electric-powered adventure touring bike, which is kind of strange because we're talking about motorcycle sound, and the Zero Motorcycles DSRX, how ironic, it doesn't have that typical motorcycle sounds.
Right, but there are actually some sounds that come from that thing, right?
Yeah, correct. There are some drivetrain whine that you hear. You hear, the brakes, the tires against the road. It's all pleasing stuff. It's just not your typical, internal combustion engine bang, bang, bang sound.
Sure.
I think mine's then the total opposite because I've got old school. We've still got an XR 650L at the office. So then riding that, I took it out to the desert, and it was actually the first time spending like a full day on that thing out in the desert, and just like, what a reminder of how good that thing is. Like, I know it's like it exists because it's simple and people love the simplicity of it, but stuff like the suspension on it, like I was doing jumps on it, and suspension like absorbs it so nicely, and it was just like such a well-built motorcycle at the time, and it just kind of like still holds true.
That bike, I have a lot of memories of that bike. My dad, he got one of the first ones, and whatever that was, 30 something years ago, 3 decades ago or whatever. And he built it up into a desert race bike, and then he made me do a team race with him, a 300-mile team race. And I was like, it beat me to death. It was so gnarly, and the bike was so heavy for me at the time. And it was so powerful because he like built the engine. It was crazy. So,
Nice.
Yeah, I still have memories of sound on that bike, but they're more of me hitting the ground a lot during that race than anything else.
Thumps.
The thumps of rocks and scraping and the wheezing of being the wind knocked out of you. Those are the sounds that I remember of an XR 650L. In terms of for me, my ears are still ringing from going riding this weekend with the boys in the woods. We had 2 guys on vintage Yamaha air-cooled bikes, and one of them was having problems with the CDI box or the stator or something, and it would backfire so loud, and it did it in my ear, my right ear, like twice while we were working on it, and my right ear is still ringing. So there are definitely some not good sounds that you can experience in motorcycling. One of them is a Yamaha DT 175 backfiring into your face. On the other side of that, I've been also shopping for something that doesn't make a lot of sound, and that is a Stark Varg EX. I'm really, really considering buying one just for the local enduro riding in the hills for me. Makes a lot of sense.
That thing
for the
does look like a
distance that I
lot of
ride.
fun.
Yeah. And the lack of engine noise could be a cool thing. I could ride it around in my yard and not bug the neighbors, and do some enduro riding right next to my house. And then, it makes sense for short, hard enduro rides that we've been doing lately. So I'm definitely considering getting my hands on one of those. So, as always, audience, we'd love to hear your questions. We want to hear your comments. Give us your opinions through the episode. Engagement helps us reach more people with this podcast, where we really want to just talk about the experience of motorcycling. And without your help, it's tough. So hit us with your comments, and let us know 1 or 2 of your favorite sounding motorcycles. Like, what do you think about the motorcycling experience and how it's impacted by sound, and what you think of the future of being quieter, right? So put your comments down. Let us know. We want to hear from you. We always do. So
Awesome. Justin, why don't you kick us off with, you already told us, some good sounding experiences, but, we're talking about bikes today. What are your favorite sounding bikes, from what you've been riding lately or in the past?
Yeah, solid. I am going to start off with a very biased sound clip. It's of my Suzuki V-Strom 800 DE rally race bike that I built this year. It's got a special built Yosh pipe that we had to do some stuff to make it clear the longer suspension travel of the rear. And with that, out came a cat, out came some baffles, and it sounds rad. And there's almost 700,000 views of Instagram that also agree that the sound of this thing is rad. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to listen to that bad boy. Just like, it's a super beefy V-twinish sound with that 270-degree crank, and it just sounds rad. I just love the way it sounds.
I remember you could just hear that thing just ripping through the desert when we were, we sitting there, alongside waiting for you, and you just hear that thing. Or I guess when you did the probably the first time really hearing it was when you did the test run on it.
Yeah.
We were like outside our Airbnb, and you're just like, oh, that thing sounds good.
Yeah, it does. We had a lot of comments from, competitors and stuff. Like, they're like, yeah, we had no problem knowing when you were near me, So you didn't have to honk your horn or press the pass button on the rally box to let people know that I was behind them and I needed by. All I had to do was just come up on the pipe on the thing, and everyone was like, oh, I'm just going to move out of the way.
Yeah.
So, that bike is quite a bit louder than the pipe you can get from Yoshimura, but even so, it still sounds pretty beefy on a stock Yosh slip-on for that bike. It's just, but a lot of the parallel twins these days, they do sound good because of the 270 firing instead of the old school setup. So they definitely sound more like a V-twin these days, and I think that's a cool thing. It helps with the feel of the bike, but they sound pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it gives it character, which is a lot of what motorcycle sound is. It helps give the bike character, and it helps kind of like heighten that experience, I think.
Very much so, especially when it's deep and throaty rather than real raspy and gnarly.
Just
you know
loud.
What I mean? Like,
it's just loud.
So,
yeah.
But let's, Adam, let's hear your first choice of what you like to hear.
This can be a surprise. Let me share my screen here. All right, we've got the Yoshimura fitted MT-09. So that inline 3 just is so awesome. I love that CP3 engine. It's just got such an awesome sound to it. Let's listen to it now. And that's with the stock exhaust. Listen in a second.
I mean, even stock, it sounds good.
It sounds awesome stock, but wait till you hear the Yoshimura. Yep. How good is that?
That sounds rad. And
how good is that?
I want to say right now, this episode is not brought to you by Yoshimura.
But, yeah, right.
But oh man, it sounds good. That sounds really throaty. Like, I mean, the stock one sounded cool, especially when you're up in the higher rev range and it's banging off the limiter. But man, the throatiness of that Yosh pipe on that thing really gives it a lot of character.
two things. First, it bodes well for new R9, right? When that thing comes out, like that thing's gonna sound awesome with pipe, like in race form, right? When they got an exhaust on it and stuff, and things like screaming down the front straight at a racetrack. That's gonna be cool. It's gonna bode well for that. But yeah, it's also, I think Yamaha's done a really cool thing over the last couple of years. So they like really focused on sound. They have those like acoustic grills on the bikes that they're putting on now.
For
like,
more,
that's just like intake noise, right?
But more intake resonance to, because in reality they are quieting down the exhaust note of all these bikes, and so in order to up the experience that you're used to having with an exhaust note, they're just having the sound come through the airbox into your face, and it's not affecting anyone else around you. So you still get that that feel, but it's not blasting out into the world too far.
Yeah, it's cool that Yamaha's doing that. I'm gonna go a little bit more old school on you guys. I gotta one of us had to go like super old school. I'm gonna share my screen. And I think we can all agree, I think this one might be the best so far. But let's see here. One sample.
Tasty.
Yep. That sounds good. Yep, that sounds rad. You definitely you hear that coming. You don't think it's a motorcycle, right? You're like, what is that F1 car doing on the back roads by my house?
This just sounds so wicked. It's inline 6-cylinder, just like Honda at that time was just making some cool sounding stuff. I don't know. I think that thing is just wicked.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it is. And that's a production motorcycle, which is super cool. A 6-cylinder production motorcycle. There was very few of those back in the day, and for that that's just cool. So many.
You just
cool old
feel
bikes.
it, right? You just feel it. Like when you just through the sound, you can have an understanding of that sensation. I don't know. It's just exhilarating.
Yeah, I mean,
love it.
It's shrill, but in a good way. It screams, but it's not a bad scream. It's very cool. So I have something very, very similar. While that is a production motorcycle, which that CB 1000F was designed by the same person that designed this bike. This is the Honda RC 166. This is a 250cc inline six that was used for racing. It was 60 horsepower, and it revved up to 18,000 RPM. So
wow,
it is very similar, but not in a way, because it revs even so much further than that CB 1000. So let's give that a listen. Gotta share my screen here. Share. Boom. Share. And away we go. Dude, how about that sound on downshift?
So good.
Cheating.
And still make it like that anymore. They don't.
Okay, so he's downshifting into the corner. This is at like Honda's like little back track near the museum. So they break these bikes out like every once in a while and fire them up, and then some lucky soul that works for Honda gets to carefully ride them around the track. But I mean, could you control yourself if you were on this thing to just not take it to the rev limiter? Let's find out. he's going pretty easy on it, but you can hear that thing is just super rad. Little, I mean, like the bore on the thing, I think is like 41 millimeters or something.
Pinky.
Yeah, like super small, like the size of like a salt shaker diameter, and then it's got a 31 millimeter stroke. So it's a super short stroke, super small piston, 6 of them in a row, dual overhead cam, like so gnarly.
I can just imagine like just a couple of those alongside each other at the track, like back in the day.
Right?
Like, just
oh man, it would
Spec racing class.
Yeah, and there are no silencers or mufflers on that thing either.
Yeah,
like it's an expansion chamber
Yeah.
and then a straight pipe out the back of that expansion chamber. So that probably contributed to a lot of hearing loss back in those days, right? Can you imagine coming home from a race after that, how bad your ears would be ringing? So, but super rad. Adam, let's hear your next one.
Well, surprise, we have another surprise in for you. Okay, I'll just tell you, it's another tuning fork brand machine. This time it's Yamaha's YZF R1.
Oh, before you play this, I gotta say, Adam has probably one of the best quotes ever talking about the sound of a cross-plane crank R1. It was probably, had to been like one of the first years it came out, and Adam was doing a review on video, and he was talking about this bike, and he says, a guy in a Ferrari will break his neck to see what that sound is if it's behind him. I always remember that. It always makes me laugh because you could have a guy that has some super expensive V12 Ferrari, and if he hears an R1, he's gonna go, "Oh, that sounds awesome."
They just sound so unique. I mean, way to go, Yamaha, for reinventing the inline four and making a completely different, sound and character engine. It's pretty cool. Let's listen to it now. It's weird because it's got that little kickback in that clip, and I think the guy probably modified that stock muffler because they're not really supposed to sound like that in stock configuration,
right?
But still good,
dude. It sounds so good because when you first hear it, you're like V4, and then you're like no, and then it feels like it goes through like the sound characters of a V, and then to like a triple almost, and then an inline four. Like it just moves this whole sonic range. It's just super good sounding.
It's cool how recognizable that sound is too. Like if you're a motorcyclist, you could hear one of those like a mile away, and you're like, "There's an R1 down the road." I love that.
For sure. I love that. I hear them quite often in this city. You hear it's an unmistakable sound, and it's so popular. I mean, it's easily the most popular sounding motorcycle I hear, at least.
Yeah. Of the modern day. Yeah, I would say
modern day, correct.
Yep.
Correct.
For sure.
Yep. However, Bradley, we've got a new one that I'm going to throw on the list. So the little backstory here, because the clip's going to kind of fly by. We were at the Vallelunga circuit earlier this year for new Ducati Panigale V4 launch. And they were testing, basically it was a V4 with the ECU tuning that they used for the Ducati Race of Champions earlier in the year when they launched that V4. And it's got the Akrapovic race exhaust on it. Which I will say is like $8,500, which is just absolutely absurd to me. What do they say? Gives it about 12 horsepower, 7 pound-feet of torque, but it drops like 14.5 pounds. But
yeah, I mean,
all yours for just $8,500.
But is that 12 horsepower added to the European spec or to the US spec? Because I think it bumps the US spec. It bumps the US up even more. Right. So you're gaining like 20 something horsepower and you're still dropping pounds. So, I mean, in the fat wallets of Ducatisti, it's $8,500 for 20 horsepower. Yeah.
So worth it. And let's hear this clip. This is a little clip that I shot alongside the track because you could hear them. They're doing some testing and like refining the ECU tuning on this thing. So they're just ripping laps. I was like, I got to go get a clip of that. So I'm going to play that right now.
That is sickening.
That's a good sounding machine as well.
I mean, it's almost maybe not even. It's just obviously a completely different sound from the R1. But God, so brilliant.
Yeah, definitely a different sound, but still also an unmistakable sound, sort of. I mean, you've got you got Aprilia's V4 as well that also sounds epic, and it was, when that thing came out, that's almost all anyone could talk about was how that bike sounded, even in comparison to how it performed or anything. It was just like, but it sounds so good. Yeah, but it's really good. Yeah, but I don't care. It sounds so good.
Yeah,
I'll just buy it for the sound. And now this thing, this Panigale V4 with that, it's just, it's a step up from that.
Yeah, again, sound is so much just about, I mean, motorcycles, especially in the US, we always talk about this, but it's so much just about the way they make you feel, right? And sound's a big part of that. And these things, man, they just
Well, it's there's all kinds of things that it brings to you, not just immediate, like, the satisfaction, but it also can like bring back memories or, thoughts of things. And so I'm going to talk about my last bike, and then we'll move on to something else. But my favorite sound of all time is a Kawasaki KX500 in the desert on the pipe with somebody that's fast on it. And, it's also goes back to, I owned one. So anytime I hear one, it tugs on the heartstrings, but also had some very good friends that raced them. And so let's listen to what a power valved, big bore, 500cc two-stroke can sound like when somebody is wringing its neck.
Is this one electric as well?
It's two-strokes sound great, but there's something about a KX500. It's got this really deep, throaty noise that comes with it that there's no really any other 500 two-stroke that sounds like it. I mean, CR500 two-stroke sounds great too, but it doesn't sound like a KX500.
Wait, are you sharing your screen?
Yeah,
oh
we
my
haven't
God.
heard it yet.
We're going to start
That's
that over.
You got it.
You guys are just like,
Well, that's
Hold
why
on.
we said, is it electric?
Yeah. Let's start again. Share. Okay, share. Okay, so we're gonna listen to what a 500cc power valve two-stroke 500 sounds like. It just sounds so good. Here we go. Right?
Just like importantly on the gas and ridden hard. Like that's where it's at. But
yeah, it's it just has a sound that is very unique to a KX500. Like if you know big bore two strokes, like you could always go, yep, that's a KX500. It just had a little bit deeper, throatier sound than some of the other bikes, less tinny, with its, and then you got somebody that's just giving it the beans and it just sounds awesome.
That's that thing too, where like you could be, on the other side of a hill or something out in the desert, and you just hear that, and it's something special, right? Like you can't see it, but you just hear it coming your way, and you just know you're like, that's something a little special there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this rolls us into the psychology of sound. I mean, motorcycles sound awesome, but like we talked about the R1, the KX500, you hear these bikes and you know what they are. And, a lot of times, like I know I've been out and about or even riding and I hear one of those bikes pass by or the Panigale V4 and sounds scary. You're like, whoa, what is that? Like, oh, like there's a lot of psychology that goes into the sounds of these vehicles. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that thing too where you don't just hear it, but you feel it, right? And I think Justin, you made a good point too. Of a lot of it's like memories, of connections. I know every time I hear an R1, I think back to one of the first kind of R1 track bikes that we built, with a big Graves exhaust and being out and riding that thing, and like how special of a day I had on that bike for the first time. It was like at the time that was to me the best leader bike you can get, and it was such a great experience being out riding that thing. And like every time I hear an R1, I think back to that now, and it just taps into your memories as a motorcyclist. And I think a lot of us, as motorcyclists, we're gearheads in a way, and you appreciate that, the mechanical actions being turned into noise, and hearing power being put to the ground.
Yeah,
basically.
Very much so. Like that, there's also these other noises that you only experience when you're on the motorcycle, that are those noises that are turning, the burning of a fuel into forward momentum. And that's like, you can hear the valve timing sometimes, you can hear the intake, you can hear the clutch doing its thing sometimes, like you can hear the chain sometimes. Like there's all these other sounds that you experience while you're riding a motorcycle that aren't just the exhaust note that most people would think of. It all comes together in this, like, not to get too cheesy, but like a concert, right? It's a concert of mechanical goodness that, it's like a form of music. So,
yeah, I think the best experiences of being on a motorcycle is when you're so in tune with it and you're like one with the bike. And that's the sound is a part of that, right? Because it's giving you that feedback of what the bike's doing, all the noises, whether it's a dry clutch on Ducati or, all these other sounds, like you said, that you're hearing.
Yeah, for sure. And then that's for the rider, but then when you're not on the motorcycle, there's also an emotional character to the noise, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, depending on who's listening. But you don't just hear a bike when it goes by. Sometimes you can feel it, right? Like there's sometimes where you can actually feel the power of the motorcycle inside your chest or through the ground or whatever. And so it's sonically, it's just, it's a language.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. That's a good way of putting it. Adam, you might be the wrong person to ask about this, but is there such thing as a motorcycle being too loud?
I don't know. I think, I love a nice sounding motorcycle, but I feel like there is, the folks who don't get the sound right or have the loud pipes on that are obnoxiously loud. Like, yeah, that doesn't sound good in my opinion, but it could be that for an automobile too. There's definitely a happy medium between, stealth quietness and too much racket and noise. And that's that's one of the good jobs that, the Tuning Fork brand's really done, because, you sound decibel test those vehicles and they're quiet. But then when you're riding them, you're like, whoa, this thing sounds good. So it sounds good, when you're, inside the cockpit, but to your neighbor down the road, he's going to hear it a little bit, but it's not going to totally drive him nuts like it would other manufacturers' vehicle,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think my thing, as long as it's not like straight pipe or fishtail exhaust on a Harley, those for me, that's the limit. That's the limit for me.
Loud pipes save lives, brother.
Yeah.
That's, I would say that maybe we've been around a lot of motorcycles and we've ridden a lot and we hear a lot of motorcycles. And so maybe, we're a bit jaded and we're getting older and wiser. Like most of us have some gray hair. Bradley's not there yet, but Adam and I have some gray hair, and there maybe was a time when nothing was too loud, but in the reality of it, if we want motorcycling to be accepted by a greater audience, it has to not be obnoxiously loud. And so there is such thing as too much noise, too loud, and we just have to deal with that.
Yeah, got to make the right noise. Speaking of, I wanted to ask you, as part of this, Adam, last year, I think it was, you got to go to the Harley Davidson, that reunion they do every year, right? And you did a big tour, and they've got their big acoustic testing facility, right? And you got to go in there?
Yeah, that was a real treat. We got to go inside their sound testing, laboratory. It's basically a big enclosed structure, maybe, 200 feet by 200 feet. It's fairly large, and it's lined with acoustic panels that basically deaden the sound or noise from whatever's in there. So when you walk in, it's kind of crazy because, when you speak, your voice is like deadened. It's muffled. It almost sounds like your ears don't really work. And they do that so they can really zero in on the acoustic channels of their exhaust note, of the engine note, of the stereo systems. And, they've spent a lot of time and effort in making the studio to be able to test the sound and make sure that the exhaust note and the engine character and the sound of the stereo is just right. It's really neat to see, and it's just kind of crazy just how dead of the sound is in that laboratory. It's not something that you typically get to experience.
Well, it says a lot about how important sound is to Harley Davidson, right? That they invest so much in a facility like that, right?
Yeah,
it's probably a little bit
realistically,
ironic because a lot of people go out and swap their Harley exhaust. It's like their first thing that they do, right? But
Yeah, very much so, which is,
yeah,
pretty wild that they, they work so hard on it. But I mean, they also offer their own Screaming Eagle accessories as well. So they know that people change them and that they want their bikes to sound a little bit different. And, I understand that, but the amount of work that Harley does, not only in the sound, but just every point of riding a Harley Davidson's experience is probably more planned out than any other manufacturer. You know what I mean? It's just, from the touch points to, the vibrations to the sound, like it's all massively, massively tested and every detail is thought of. And, people will go, oh, it's such an old school motorcycle and it sounds so old and it's so weird. Well, they make it that way. Like they make you, they cover up all the technology and all the newness with things like that sound room and getting the sound just right.
yeah, and it sounds silly to say this again, I know, but again, motorcycling, Harley more than anyone knows that it's so much about the feel and how a bike makes you feel.
Mm-hmm.
They're less concerned about performance, outright performance. I mean, now a little bit more so, but really to them, it's about the sensation you have of riding that bike. And and they recognize it's about the vibrations, the sound that it's making, all of that. And that's where a lot of their focus goes to, it seems like.
Yep. So, well, what about so we talk about like Harley Davidson and the sound and the feel and all that stuff, but let's talk about like electric bikes and like the lack of sound. Like Bradley, you just went on the Can-Am Pulse and Origin press launch where they take it even a step further than some of the other electric motorcycle manufacturers where they put the chain inside of a housing so you don't even hear the chain noise.
Yeah, that was interesting. I didn't really understand that direction at first. The backstory is that silent chain case that they're using, it actually is pullover technology from their snowmobiles. So that's a system that they run on their snowmobiles. But I think you might have mentioned it earlier. One of the things with the electric bikes is that you have that silence, the motor, but you're hearing chain slap and things like that. And in some ways, it kind of can distract from the experience a little bit. It's kind of more than anything just sounds that you're not used to hearing while you're riding. So it basically removes all of that from the experience. And that was absolutely one of the most the quietest motorcycling experiences I've ever had, for sure. I think it takes a little time to get used to. The one thing I will say is, I think one of the things that we all love about motorcycle riding is it kind of immerses you in nature and the outdoors and things like that. And I think when you all of a sudden take out that sound, you almost feel like the other senses are heightened and you're kind of, you're feeling all that, your environment a little bit more in a way. It's still, I don't know, I was torn on it because it was a long day for me. I had been sick before I went and rode those bikes, so I was like exhausted, but like I was so tired riding that bike, and there was like nothing to keep me like alert and awake because there was like no vibration to it, no sound. And I remember like we were stopping, and I'm like, I need an energy drink. I just remember being so tired, and just like there was nothing about that bike that like kept me awake and feeling like alive, you know?
Right.
So that was interesting. But as far as that chain case goes on that, you know, obviously it's a big thing for them, for Can-Am, and it works. I mean, you don't hear a thing from that chain from the final drive system at all. It was cool. And I think, I don't know, we can talk about this a little bit more later, but there is that idea of the next generation of riders, you know, all these kids that have grown up on Surons and electric, you know, bicycles and mopeds and things like that. And sound might not be as big of a thing. They're used to that.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
so
that's a really cool thing about all these Surons and Super 73s and all these things. Like in Irvine, where our office is, you see so many kids riding into school, and it makes me happy because I see all of them. I go, future motorcyclists, future motorcyclists, future motorcyclists, and they may want the experience of a silent motorcycle because they're used to it. Like, you know, they may get on a normal motorcycle and go, this thing is so loud and it's making all these weird noises. It may be distracting to them.
yeah,
Where we're the opposite, where we're like,
Yeah.
it's distracting that we don't have those noises.
yes, yeah. I will say, I did. It's just it's kind of a decent example. I took that little gas e-bike that we have. I took that out to the desert as like a little pit bike, and just I was like powering through the desert on that, and it was kind of cool in a way to experience the California desert in that way. Again, I think when you don't have the sound and you're not interrupted by that, all your other senses kind of heightened, and you just like taking in all the smells and, you know, the wind and things like that when you're out in the desert and riding. So I think it's just a different experience. I wouldn't necessarily say that I like and appreciate riding electrics more because of the silence. But I do think there is something to say for future generations kind of being okay with that silence, you know?
Yep. I agree. Silence is going to work out for some people. But I don't think that it's going to work out for everyone. And I think some of them are going to want noise, and there'll always be, just because there's electrics, ice bikes are not going away. So don't worry about not having motorcycling noises in your future, right?
Have you guys watched like a Moto E race? You guys watch that series at all?
Yeah, I watched one at a MotoGP race in Misano, and I mean, it's a different noise. There's noise though. Like you hear the whine of the motor, you hear kind of some chain noise. You actually sometimes hear the tires doing their thing more. And it's a different noise. It's not as loud. It's not cacophonous. It's very
It's different.
there's not as much energy in it. I'll give you that. Like but you know, it was interesting. The racing was all right, you know, but when you're at the racetrack and there's Triumph Moto 2, you know, Triumph powdered Moto 2 bikes, and there's, you know, the gnarly Moto 3 bikes and the Moto G bikes in the same place at the same time, it is a bit lacking.
Yeah. It's a different experience for sure. Yeah, I guess watching it on TV, I don't necessarily mind. You know, it doesn't seem to impact my experience, but yeah, I could see there's obviously that concern of, you know, being there, and I don't know, you want to kind of hear all those noises and things. So yeah, it's interesting. It'll be an interesting thing is electric motorcycle racing in the future and what that does for audiences.
Very
I
much
think
so.
what, Justin, you had some stuff from like your KTM days, right? And like a little bit more on like the testing and things like that.
Yeah, it was really interesting. In my time working at KTM, was when they were coming out with the 2017-ish EXCFs, so the dual sport bike, and you know, getting a dirt bike-ish motorcycle to pass the sound emissions has become more and more and more difficult. And the sound testing, you know, had revealed some interesting things, that it's not actually the exhaust note that is the most that's putting it over the edge. It is the chain noise, the tire noise, the intake noise, like all these other things are actually now overpowering the engine note for the drive-by testing. And so, that's when KTM implemented the reed block in the intake boot of the bike. Basically was an idea of Roger DeCoster's. Like everyone was racking their brains on trying to figure out how to make the intake noise quieter, because that's what was putting them over the sound limit on the test. And Roger was like, well, air pressure is sound. And so why not just put a reed block in out of a 2-stroke, and it'll stop the sound waves from going out, but it'll let the air in. And that's what they did, and it got them under the limit. Now,
That's
whether
cool.
or not there's any performance gains or losses to that, there's people that are always removing them when they're building up their KTMs to make them faster. But at the same time, for their average Joe, it works because it makes the bike wider, and you can get that bike. But they even changed the tires. They changed from like a more knobby tire to a Continental TKC 80 adventure bike tire, just so the knob noise was quieter when it was rolling, because it was too loud on the knobs. So super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a good point that the sounds come from all the things, not just the exhaust.
Yep. The sound it comes from all the things, like we said before, and that's all part of the experience. And manufacturers are having to work harder and harder to make sure they're under the limits of the regulations to bring you these noises and still give you the experience.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we have hit the end of the road of our sonic journey on sound. Main takeaways for this: sound in motorcycling is important, whether it's the sound of a 2-stroke pipe, or a Yoshimura exhaust on a CP3, or even an electric motorcycle. It all adds to the experience of motorcycling, and it's been changing, right, since day one. You've gone from 2-stroke to 4 strokes. There's sound emissions regulations, and now there's electrics. The sound of motorcycling is always going to change, and it's always going to be different. And we're here for it, no matter what it's going to sound like, right, guys?
Yep. Yeah,
Heck
and
yeah.
I think it'll be different for every generation of rider, really.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. So, with that, again, thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. We really want to hear from you guys. Listener engagement is important, and we really do care what you think. So again, put your comments down below, like and share if you like what we're doing. And thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.